Alright everyone, now we have to talk about the Taliban on Twitter. Link in the description, that's the actual, one of their spokespeople has a significant Twitter account. I find this very, very funny. The Taliban is allowed to post propaganda on Twitter as long as they don't get too violent. This is literally what Twitter has said. But Trump isn't there, even though he's been vindicated by the FBI's initial report on the Capitol riot. That seems slightly odd. So, one person, Jack Dorsey doesn't like him, he makes mean tweets, it's the real reason he's gone, makes a speech and tells people to go protest. They decide to act up. It wasn't even pre-planned, generally speaking. He gets kicked off Twitter because of what other people do. The Taliban, at a moment's notice, could put out a post saying, take up arms and slaughter the infidels and kill 100,000 people. Despite that very, very real possibility, it's okay. No, they're basically the legitimate government of Afghanistan, says Jack Dorsey. It's okay if they have a Twitter account. Isn't this a little bit odd, a little bit of a conflict of interests when a U.S. firm, supposedly a U.S.-based firm, subject to U.S. law, working with the U.S. government, platforming goods and services and stuff, is promoting this, literally promoting it. The mere fact that they're allowed to have a Twitter account vindicates and validates essentially their political standing. Essentially, at this point, Twitter is so censorious that it might as well be an endorsement of a person's character if they're even allowed to have a Twitter account, unless it's so minor that nobody knows who they are, which is 99% of Twitter. This account has hundreds of thousands of people following it. It's a mouthpiece, to be clear, for the Taliban. How can Twitter as well say, well, women's rights, we're going to ban you for misogyny. Gay rights, you're homophobic because the SPLC said so. And then the Taliban is welcome with open arms. They roll out the red carpet for their propaganda. It's sort of like Xinhua News. Supposedly COVID disinfo is banned on Twitter. They spew it out every single day, ranting about Fort Derrick being the mythological origin birthplace of COVID, which actually came from the Wuhan lab. We know that now. It's not really up for discussion. They were talking a couple of weeks ago. They posted about how Chinese scientists were experimenting with some sort of cholesterol drug and how it could keep you from dying from COVID. Well, supposedly, if you even discuss ivermectin in the wrong way on many platforms, you get banned. Why is Xinhua News, with all of its bots, that's also against TOS, but Jack Dorsey overlooks that too, why are they allowed to post roughly similar, roughly equivalent material? Now, to be clear, I don't want to ban the Taliban on Twitter. No, I just think that Twitter shouldn't be banning any political group. I don't really care what they say. If the Taliban says weird shit on Twitter, tendency is they'll get ratioed. What they should do, what Twitter should do, is prevent public officials, propaganda pages, legacy media, major corporate brand accounts and stuff from blocking people and hiding tweets. Just let nature take its course. The only point of Twitter at this point is to shitpost anyway. It's no longer good for notifications, which is why I only rarely post my uploads there. There's no point to it other than trolling people. It's really the only reason I've still got one. I was asked the other day by someone who watches my material, I won't name names, why I don't use Gab more. It's like, well, it's going to be harder to piss people off there because it's not an echo chamber, but I have more fun pissing off the leftoids than I would like the MGTOW or the Deus Vulturs that are on that platform, so who cares? I find it so funny, though. Can you imagine if something equivalent to this had happened, 5-10 years ago? If Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, if they had the Taliban, or like Al-Qaeda or ISIS or some shit promoting material on the platform, but then started banning or suspending U.S. public figures. They've done this to Marjorie Taylor Greene. They're one strike away from removing her from Twitter as a platform. At this point, billionaires are influencing the political process in a completely wanton, undue manner. That probably already violates U.S. law, but, they have deep pockets and Congress loves money, so it's not really spoken of. And the handful of people that do speak out keep, ironically, being the ones that have material removed. Like Rand Paul, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, people like that. By the way, since these sites, 3 or 4 of them together, are like 90% of the public square, it's a violation of people's free speech. Ultimately, almost a violation of assembly. When you think about it, in the digital space, people do assemble together. It's just they're not doing it in physical person. The court should get involved at some point and uphold the modern First Amendment. It's just like the First Amendment covers, electronic literature and shit. It doesn't just start and end with fountain pens and manual printing presses. It's just like the Second Amendment doesn't just involve muskets and cannons. Those are really cool, black powder weapons, and did have air rifles that were semi-automatic, by the way, back in the 1700s. Here, the puckle gun, they had all sorts of shit. But no, it covers the AR-15, it covers the AK-47, it covers the Glock 17, it covers modern weapons too. For the most part, ATF continuously tries to dumb this down. If Chipman gets in there, even more so. The Taliban, meanwhile, is an actual group that conducted an insurrection because of Joe Biden letting them and encouraging them to do so a week ago, and it's a big problem. By the way, Joe Biden doesn't even know how long it's been since people were falling off of the airplanes. He's like, well, it's been like a week, man. And when he said it was like 2 or 3 days. He doesn't even know what's going on. You don't see. By the way, why is DC not pushing back against this? Biden's administration should be telling Twitter, you need to re-platform U.S. public figures because First Amendment, we care about free expression. Why are you, meanwhile, allowing the Taliban, a state sponsor of terror, literally a state sponsor at this point, they run Afghanistan and even have their own flag. They're all but an independently functioning sovereign nation now in literally everything other than full function, even with diplomatic recognition from a bunch of countries. If they're posting propaganda and presumably in the future will be, trying to attack women and gay rights, what are you doing? Jack Dorsey's definitely going through his midlife crisis. Every time he makes a public appearance, he looks more bizarre and piratical. It's sort of like watching Beto O'Rourke if Beto O'Rourke were still rich. That's about all. Peace out.